Hello, my friends. Good evening. Welcome to Stories for Sleep. Take a moment now and find your most comfortable spot where you can let go of the day, a place where you can settle in, close your eyes, and let your body unwind. Take a deep breath in and out, slowly, gently, feeling the air filling your lungs. Let the breath calm you, filling you with a sense of peace. As you exhale, allow yourself to soften, releasing any lingering tension, any worries that might still be lingering at the edges of your mind. You don't need to think of anything now, only this moment, only the warmth, the stillness. Imagine, if you will, the softest blanket wrapping around you, the kind that feels like the gentle embrace of the world itself. You're safe here. The sounds of the world beyond fade away, leaving only the quiet rustle of trees, the soft whisper of the wind outside. The air is crisp and fresh, and you feel your entire body settling deeper, growing more peaceful with each passing moment. Now, imagine yourself standing on a soft forest path, the ground beneath your feet warm with earth, the trees above you swaying gently in the breeze. The moonlight shimmers through the leaves, casting a delicate glow that feels like magic itself. You breathe in the cool night air, the scent of pine and fresh dew, and you let it all sink in, slowly. Here, in this moment, you are ready to journey into a world of fairy tales, where time moves gently, and every moment is filled with possibility. Once upon a time, in a kingdom hidden beneath the shadows of towering mountains and deep, ancient forests, there stood a grand castle. Its high towers rose above the trees, their silvered roofs glimmering faintly in the moonlight. The castle's walls, sturdy and ancient, seemed to have seen countless seasons pass. Yet there was something about the place that felt timeless, a place where the air seemed to pause, just for a moment, as if holding its breath. Inside the castle, there lived a queen. She was kind-hearted and graceful, with eyes that sparkled like the stars. Yet, beneath her soft gaze, there was a sadness that lingered, a yearning she could never quite satisfy. For years, the queen had longed for a child, someone to share her love, to fill the castle with laughter and joy. But time had passed, and her dream remained just that, a dream. Then, one cold winter's evening, as snowflakes softly drifted down from the heavens, the queen found herself gazing out of a tall window. She rested her hands on her growing belly, feeling the warmth of her little one. And as the moonlight bathed the land, she whispered a quiet wish to the stars above. Please, let me have a child to call my own, a child with the heart of this kingdom. That very night, her wish was answered. As the snow continued to fall outside, the queen gave birth to a daughter, a child as fair as the freshly fallen snow, with skin so pale it seemed to glow in the soft light. Her hair was the deepest shade of black, like the midnight sky, and her lips were a perfect shade of rose. The queen, overcome with joy, held her daughter in her arms. Snow White, she whispered softly, for her child was as pure and beautiful as the snow. The name felt as though it had been chosen long before she spoke it. The queen's heart swelled with love, and for the first time in many years, she felt at peace. But even in the warmth of her embrace, a strange unease hung in the air. A quiet, cold feeling that she couldn't shake, as though something was watching them from the shadows. It was a subtle thing, a whisper in the wind, but it was enough to make the queen uneasy. Days turned into weeks, and Snow White grew. her beauty becoming more radiant with each passing day. Her laughter filled the castle halls, a sound as light and gentle as the wind through the trees. The queen's love for her daughter blossomed with each moment, but still that feeling lingered, growing stronger in the queen's heart. Then, one day, on the eve of Snow White's christening, a mysterious figure appeared at the castle gates. She was a woman of striking beauty, with eyes as dark as night. She wore a cloak of shadows, her presence both regal and chilling. The courtiers were all taken by her strange allure, but there was something about her that sent an unsettling ripple through the queen's heart. This woman, dressed in black, made her way through the halls of the castle. The queen, noticing the strange aura that surrounded her, was filled with a deep sense of unease. The woman's eyes met the queen's with a cold, unblinking gaze, and for a moment, the queen felt as though she were looking into the very heart of the darkness itself. "Your daughter," the woman said softly, her voice like the soft rustle of leaves in a forgotten forest, "is as beautiful as the snow. But beauty is a dangerous thing." Before the queen could react, the woman turned and vanished, her presence lingering like a shadow in the air. The queen, her heart heavy with foreboding, could not shake the words that had been spoken. Snow White, so pure, so innocent, would not remain untouched by the dark forces that seemed to swirl ever closer. And just as the queen's heart began to fear what the future might hold, something deep inside her stirred, something protective, something fierce. But what would happen next? What was the dark force that had come to watch over Snow White? What would become of the beautiful princess, whose fate seemed already tangled in mystery? The days passed in the kingdom like a gentle breeze, each one bringing the princess closer to her 16th year. Snow White grew more beautiful with every moment, her skin as fair as the winter snow, her hair as dark as the midnight sky, and her eyes that seemed to hold the mystery of the stars themselves. She was a child full of joy, her laughter light and carefree, filling the castle with a warmth that seemed to chase away the shadows. But even as the years passed, the queen could not shake a sense of unease that had settled in her heart. Her fears grew as dark clouds seemed to gather in the corners of the kingdom. Something or someone was watching her beloved daughter. The queen could feel it, though no one else seemed to notice. One day, while Snow White was in the garden, playing among the flowers and the trees, the queen stood at her window, her gaze fixed on the girl she loved so deeply. She watched as Snow White twirled in the sunlight, her laughter like the sweetest song. Yet, as the wind whispered through the branches, the queen's heart seemed to tighten with fear. She knew that the darkness which had once come to the castle would return, and this time it would not be so easily ignored. Later that evening, the queen stood before her mirror, a delicate and ancient thing, framed in gold and adorned with intricate carvings of vines and flowers. The mirror had always been her confidant, her silent companion in times of solitude. But now, as the queen's hand rested upon the glass, she felt a chill creeping up her spine. "Mirror, mirror on the wall," she whispered, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "Who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror, as it always did, responded in its soft, ethereal voice. "You, my queen, are the fairest of them all." But the queen, though she had always been reassured by the mirror's words, felt no comfort now. She turned from the mirror, her mind troubled by thoughts she could not shake. She knew the time was drawing near, the time when the darkness would find her daughter. It was only a matter of when and how. The very next day, as the kingdom prepared for the grand celebration of Snow White's 16th birthday, the queen took her daughter aside. The princess, unaware of the dangers that lay ahead, smiled up at her mother with those bright, trusting eyes. "Mother, what is it?" Snow White asked, sensing the unease in her mother's voice. The queen knelt beside her daughter, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. She looked into Snow White's eyes, her heart aching with love and fear. She had never wanted to burden her daughter with the weight of the world, but now the queen knew she had no choice. "My dear child," the queen began softly, "there are things in this world that we do not understand. There are forces, powerful and ancient, that seek to harm those who are pure of heart." Snow White's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean, mother?" The queen took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "There is a darkness, my love, that has been watching you since the day you were born. It will come for you when you're most vulnerable, when you're unprepared. You must be careful, Snow White. Do not trust everyone you meet, for not all are what they seem." Snow White, though frightened, nodded. "I will be careful, mother. I promise." The queen kissed her daughter's forehead, her heart heavy with a love that seemed too large for the world around them. "I will always protect you," she whispered, "but sometimes you must protect yourself as well." That evening, as the candles were lit in the grand hall for Snow White's birthday celebration, there was a sense of unease in the air, as though the very walls of the castle were holding their breath. The guests arrived in their finest clothes, their voices full of cheer and laughter, but the queen could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. The music played softly, and Snow White, dressed in a gown of delicate white silk, moved gracefully through the room, her eyes alight with excitement and innocence. The queen watched her daughter closely, unable to rid herself of the fear that clung to her heart. Then, just as the celebration reached its peak, the queen's heart skipped a beat. She saw a figure standing at the edge of the room, a woman dressed in dark flowing robes, her face hidden beneath a veil of shadows. The guests moved past her, oblivious to her presence, but the queen's eyes locked onto her immediately. The woman's gaze met hers, and in that moment, the queen knew. She knew the darkness had arrived. The woman stepped forward, her movements graceful and unsettling. She made her way through the crowd, her eyes never leaving the queen's. The guests, still lost in their revelry, did not notice the stranger's approach. Snow White, her back turned, continued to laugh and dance, unaware of the danger that was moving closer with every passing second. The queen's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to rush to her daughter to protect her, but she knew that doing so would only make things worse. The stranger's presence seemed to hold a power all its own, a force that was undeniable, yet not quite understood. The woman stopped just before Snow White, standing in silence for a long moment. The air in the room grew thick, as though time itself had slowed. Everyone had fallen silent, drawn to the woman by an unseen force, but no one dared to speak. Snow White turned, her eyes wide with innocence, and smiled at the woman. "Good evening," Snow White said, her voice as soft as the evening breeze. "Who are you?" The woman's lips curled into a cold smile. "I am someone who has been waiting for this moment," she said, her voice low and smooth, like the whisper of ice. "Waiting for you, Snow White." And in that moment, the queen knew that everything was about to change. But what would happen next? What was the woman's true purpose? Was Snow White in danger? And what would the queen do to protect her precious daughter? The room was filled with an eerie silence. The guests stood motionless, eyes wide with an unspoken understanding that something extraordinary was unfolding before them. Snow White's innocent smile faltered as the mysterious woman before her tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. The queen's heart raced in her chest. She knew with a sinking certainty that the woman standing before Snow White was no ordinary guest. No, this was the darkness she had feared, come to claim what was not hers. The queen's breath caught in her throat, but she dared not move. She could feel the weight of her daughter's life hanging in the balance, suspended in the tension of the moment. Snow White, ever the kind-hearted soul, remained unaware of the danger. She stepped closer to the woman, her eyes filled with curiosity and innocence. "You seem unfamiliar," Snow White said softly, her voice as pure as the moonlight streaming through the castle windows. "I don't think I've seen you here before." The woman's lips curled into a cold smile. "No, dear child," she replied, her voice smooth like velvet, but with an undercurrent of something dark. "You haven't, but I've been watching you for a very long time." The queen's pulse quickened. She stepped forward, her hand instinctively reaching for the dagger hidden beneath her robes. But she hesitated. She had to be careful. If she acted too soon, too recklessly, Snow White might be harmed. She needed to think, to find a way to protect her daughter without exposing her plans. But the mysterious woman seemed to sense the queen's anxiety. Her eyes, black as the midnight sky, flickered toward the queen for a brief moment, as though daring her to make a move. The queen's grip tightened on the hilt of the dagger, but she remained still. Snow White, still unknowing, continued to smile at the woman, her voice soft and sweet. "Who are you?" she asked again, the trust in her eyes as pure as her heart. The woman stepped forward, her dark robes flowing like shadows around her. She lifted her hand, almost as if she were about to touch Snow White's cheek, but instead her fingers hovered in the air, just inches from the princess's face. "I am the one who has come to take what is mine," she said, her voice soft, but with an undeniable weight. Her words were chilling, as if they were the prelude to a long-forgotten prophecy. Snow White blinked, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Take what is yours." The woman's smile widened, her gaze cold and calculating. "You, Snow White, you are the fairest, but that beauty will come at a cost. I have waited long enough. The time has come." Before Snow White could respond, the woman raised her hand, a faint, shimmering glow beginning to surround her fingers. The room seemed to grow colder, as if the very air had frozen in anticipation. At that moment, the queen could no longer wait. She stepped forward with a swift, graceful motion, placing herself between Snow White and the mysterious figure. Her voice rang out, filled with authority and protectiveness. "You will not touch her," the queen commanded, her tone fierce, though her heart trembled within her chest. The woman's eyes narrowed, but her smile remained unchanged. "Ah, the queen," she said softly, her voice dripping with disdain. "So protective, so blind. You think you can keep her safe, don't you? But even you cannot escape what is destined. The queen raised her chin, her heart swelling with love for her daughter. I will protect her, no matter the cost. The mysterious woman stepped back, her figure blending with the shadows. Very well, she said, her voice a low whisper now. But remember, I always get what I want, and I will return for what is mine. With that, she vanished, disappearing as quickly as she had arrived, leaving behind only a lingering chill that seemed to seep into the very walls of the castle. The guests, still frozen in place, slowly began to stir, their murmurings filling the air with confusion and fear. The queen turned to Snow White, her face pale but resolute. She took the princess's hands gently in her own, her voice barely above a whisper. Snow White, she said, her eyes filled with love and sorrow. I'm so sorry. You must never go near that woman again. She is dangerous, far more dangerous than you can understand. Snow White, her expression still confused but trusting, nodded. I don't understand, Mother. Who was she? What did she mean by taking what is hers? The queen shook her head slowly, her heart heavy. I don't know, but I suspect it is a danger we cannot ignore. We must prepare, Snow White. We must be ready for whatever comes next. That night, as the castle slept under a blanket of stars, the queen stood alone by her window, gazing out into the darkened forest that surrounded the kingdom. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the air was still, too still. A feeling of unease hung in the air, like a storm that had yet to break. She could not shake the image of the mysterious woman, her cold, calculating eyes. The queen had faced many challenges in her life, but nothing had prepared her for this. The darkness had come for her daughter, and it would not rest until it had claimed what it sought. The queen's heart ached with the knowledge that Snow White's safety could not be guaranteed within the walls of the castle. The only way to protect her now was to send her far away into the heart of the forest where the shadows could not follow. But would Snow White be safe there? Could she truly escape the danger that seemed to loom over her like a shadow, watching from the distance? The queen did not know, but one thing was certain. The time had come for Snow White to leave the castle. The next morning, the queen summoned the most trusted of her servants, a man named Roderick, who had served the royal family for many years. His face was lined with age, his eyes sharp and wise, and he had always been loyal. Roderick, the queen said, her voice firm, you must take Snow White far away, into the forest. No one must know where she goes. She must be protected at all costs. Roderick bowed deeply, sensing the gravity of the situation. Of course, Your Majesty. I will see to it. The queen's voice wavered slightly. Take care of her. Keep her safe. Roderick nodded solemnly, his heart heavy. I swear, Your Majesty, she will be protected. As Snow White was prepared for her journey, she did not understand the full weight of her mother's request. She trusted Roderick, and her heart was filled with confusion and curiosity. Why did she need to leave? Why did her mother seem so afraid? But the queen's face was filled with love and sorrow as she kissed Snow White goodbye, holding her daughter close for just a moment longer than she should have. I love you, she whispered softly, and I will always be with you. And so, Snow White was sent into a forest, unaware of the true danger that awaited her. The castle, once a place of warmth and safety, now felt distant, as though a part of her had been left behind. But what dangers lay ahead in the forest? Would Snow White be safe, or was the darkness already following her, waiting for the right moment to strike? The sun was just beginning to set as Snow White and Roderick made their way deeper into the heart of the forest. The air was cool, and a soft breeze rustled the leaves in the trees, creating a quiet, soothing symphony of nature. The forest around them was dense, its towering trees standing like silent sentinels, their branches weaving together to form a canopy that cast gentle shadows over the path. Snow White's heart ached with confusion and sorrow. She had said goodbye to her mother just hours ago, and the weight of that parting pressed heavily on her chest. The queen had kissed her forehead with such tenderness, her eyes filled with love and fear. Snow White could still feel the warmth of that embrace, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Why had her mother sent her away? Why couldn't she stay in the castle where it was safe? She glanced at Roderick, who walked beside her, his face serious but kind. He had always been a man of few words, but Snow White could sense that he, too, felt the tension in the air. "Roderick," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why am I here? Why did my mother send me into the forest?" Roderick glanced at her briefly, his eyes dark with the knowledge he couldn't yet share. "Your mother did what she thought was best, my lady," he said, his voice steady, but filled with a quiet sadness. "There are things in this world that are far beyond our control. Your safety is the most important thing right now." Snow White felt a shiver run down her spine. But what's happening? What danger are we running from? Roderick paused for a moment, his gaze distant as if he were searching for the right words. "The Queen has always protected you, Snow White. But there are forces in this world, forces that no one can control. You must trust her. She sent you to the forest to keep you safe." Snow White's brow furrowed with confusion, but she didn't press him further. There was a sadness in Roderick's eyes that made her heart ache, and she didn't want to add to it. Instead, she turned her gaze to the path ahead, watching as the forest began to darken, the shadows lengthening with the setting sun. The deeper they walked into the forest, the more the trees seemed to close in around them, their branches twisting like fingers, reaching toward the sky. The ground beneath their feet was soft, and the air grew thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. It was a peaceful place, yes, but there was something about it that felt off. Snow White could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up, as though she were being watched. Roderick seemed to sense her unease. "Stay close," he said quietly, his voice low. "The forest is not a place to wander alone." Snow White nodded, staying close to Roderick as they walked. The sounds of the forest filled the air, birds calling to one another in the distance, the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. But there was something else in the air as well, a faint, unsettling silence that seemed to surround them, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. As they walked deeper, Snow White felt an odd pull in her chest, as if something was calling to her. She couldn't explain it, but there was a quiet whisper in the back of her mind, urging her forward. It was as if the forest was beckoning her, inviting her to uncover something hidden deep within. Roderick's steps quickened, and Snow White noticed that he was glancing around nervously, His hand rested on the hilt of his sword, and his posture had grown tense, as if he were expecting something to jump out from the shadows at any moment. "Roderick?" Snow White asked, her voice soft but filled with concern. "What is it? What's wrong?" Roderick didn't answer right away. He simply kept walking, his eyes scanning the trees. Snow White's heart began to race. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw something moving in the shadows. Just a flicker, but it was enough to make her freeze in place. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Roderick's hand tightened on his sword. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the forest around them. "Stay behind me, Snow White," he ordered, his voice tense. Snow White's breath caught in her throat as a low, guttural sound filled the air. A growl, deep and menacing, coming from the shadows. Her eyes widened in fear. She had never heard anything like it before. "Roderick, what is it?" Snow White's voice trembled with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Before he could answer, a shape darted through the trees. It was fast, too fast for her to comprehend. The shadows seemed to shift and twist, as though they had a life of their own. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the shape vanished again into the darkness. Roderick's grip on his sword tightened. "We must keep moving," he said, his voice urgent now. "Stay close and don't look back." Snow White nodded, though her heart was pounding in her chest. She didn't understand what was happening, but she could feel the danger closing in around her. The forest seemed alive with unseen threats, its dark corners hiding things she could not even imagine. As they moved forward, Snow White couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed, that something or someone was out there, watching them from the shadows. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and the whispers in the back of her mind grew louder, urging her to turn back. But there was no turning back. Not now. The path ahead was shrouded in darkness, and as they continued to walk, the forest seemed to grow more oppressive, the shadows longer and darker. Snow White could feel the weight of the forest pressing down on her, the air thick with tension. She had no idea what awaited her in the heart of this ancient wood, but she could feel a pull of destiny drawing her forward. And then, as the last light of the setting sun faded beneath the horizon, they arrived at a small clearing. It was eerily quiet, and the moonlight filtered down through the trees, casting a soft glow over the ground. In the center of the clearing stood an old stone cottage, its windows dark and shuttered. Vines crawled up its walls, and the roof was covered in moss, as though it had been abandoned for years. Snow White stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding. This was the place. This was where she had been drawn to, where the whispers in her mind had led her. She felt a strange sense of familiarity, as if she had been here before, though she knew she hadn't. Roderick hesitated, his gaze fixed on the cottage. "This is where I must leave you, my lady," he said quietly, his voice heavy with regret. "I cannot go further." Snow White looked at him, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean? Why can't you stay?" Roderick's eyes were sad, filled with a quiet sorrow. "This is your destiny, Snow White. The forest will keep you safe, but I cannot protect you here. You must go inside, and you must find the answers." Snow White hesitated, her heart heavy with uncertainty. What answers? But Roderick said no more. He turned away, his footsteps fading into the darkness, leaving her standing alone in the clearing, facing the mysterious cottage that held the answer she sought. What is the secret of the cottage? What answers await Snow White inside? And what dangers lurk in the shadows, waiting to reveal themselves? The forest around Snow White was unnaturally quiet as she stood at the edge of the clearing, her heart racing in her chest. The wind had died down, leaving only the soft rustling of the leaves as a distant, haunting reminder of the world beyond the trees. The old stone cottage before her was silent, its dark windows like eyes staring back at her, watching. Roderick's footsteps had long since faded into the night, leaving Snow White alone in the quiet darkness. She couldn't help but feel a cold chill in the air, despite the warmth of the summer evening. Something about this place was off. There was an almost tangible sense of ancient power, as though the very stones of the cottage had witnessed centuries of secrets. Snow White hesitated. She wanted to call out, to ask Roderick to return, to not leave her here alone, but she knew he wouldn't come back. The look in his eyes when he had left had been full of sorrow, as if he, too, understood the gravity of the moment. She had no choice but to move forward. With a deep breath, Snow White took a tentative step toward the cottage. The ground beneath her feet was soft with moss, and as she walked, the shadows seemed to stretch toward her, urging her forward. She reached the doorstep, her hand trembling as she placed it on the old wooden door. The wood was weathered, the edges rough with age, and it creaked as if protesting her touch. For a moment, Snow White paused, her heart heavy in her chest. This was it. This was the place she had been led to, the place where her answers waited. She could feel the weight of destiny pressing down on her, and yet, despite the uncertainty, she felt an odd sense of calm. There was a strange sense of familiarity in the air, as if this place was somehow tied to her very soul. Snow White pushed the door open, the creak of the hinges echoing through the stillness of the forest. The inside of the cottage was dim, lit only by the soft glow of moonlight filtering through the small, shuttered windows. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and dried flowers, mingling with the musty odor of aged wood. As Snow White stepped inside, she noticed the fireplace on the far side of the room. The embers were long gone, but the ashes still smoldered faintly in the hearth. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with jars of strange, unfamiliar ingredients, dried leaves, roots, and bottles of shimmering liquid. The room seemed alive with an energy that was both ancient and unsettling. In the center of the room stood a large wooden table, cluttered with more jars, scrolls, and what appeared to be an old, worn book. Snow White's gaze was drawn to it, and she found herself moving toward the table, her hands trembling as she reached for the book. It was bound in dark leather, the edges frayed and worn with age. She could feel the power of it, the weight of centuries of knowledge within its pages. As she opened it, Snow White's eyes were drawn to a single page, illuminated by the soft light of the moon. The page was filled with symbols and writing she could not understand, but one thing was clear. The words seemed to shimmer, almost as if they were alive, reacting to her presence. Her fingers brushed lightly over the page, and as she did, a soft, melodic voice filled the room, echoing around her. The truth lies within the heart of the forest. Snow White's breath caught in her throat. The voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried with it an undeniable weight. The words seemed to wrap around her, pulling her deeper into the mystery of this place. The forest, the cottage, and the very air around her seemed to come alive, as if acknowledging her presence. "You must seek the heart," the voice continued, "for only when the heart is found will you be free." Snow White's mind raced. What did it mean? What heart? Was this the key to everything? The key to understanding why she had been sent here? Why she had been kept hidden away in the castle, away from the world? Before she could process the words, the book slammed shut in her hands, as if it had a life of its own. Snow White stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath shallow. The cottage seemed to shudder, the very walls groaning in protest, as though something ancient had been disturbed. A cold wind swept through the room, blowing out the dim candlelight that flickered on the table, plunging the room into darkness. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the doorway. Snow White froze, her body tense with fear. The figure was cloaked in shadow, its face obscured by the hood of its dark robe. But even in the darkness, Snow White could feel the presence of this mysterious figure, powerful and cold. "You have found it," the figure said, its voice deep and resonant, "the heart of the forest. But now you must face the truth of your existence." Snow White's heart hammered in her chest. She could feel her hands trembling, but she forced herself to stand tall. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice shaky but determined. "What truth? What do you want from me?" The figure stepped forward, its movements graceful and deliberate. "I am the one who has waited for you, Snow White," it said, "the one who has watched you since your birth. I am the one who has been tied to your fate, and now it is time for you to understand why." Snow White swallowed hard, her breath caught in her throat. "Tell me," she demanded, "what is the truth? Why am I here?" The figure's hood slowly lifted, revealing a face Snow White did not recognize. Yet somehow it was familiar. The woman before her had dark, piercing eyes, and her skin was pale as marble. She smiled, but it was not a comforting smile. It was cold, calculating, and full of knowledge Snow White could not yet comprehend. "The truth, Snow White," the woman said softly, "is that you are not just a princess. You are the key to something much greater, and you will be forced to choose between the light and the darkness, between what is right and what is easy." Snow White took a step back, her mind swirling with confusion. "I don't understand," she whispered, almost to herself. "I don't understand any of this." The woman's smile widened. "You will. In time, you will understand everything. But first, you must face the darkness within yourself." Before Snow White could respond, the woman turned and melted back into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as she had come, leaving Snow White standing alone in the cold, dim cottage. "Sleep peacefully, my friend. Let the story weave its way through your dreams, where the adventure continues in the quiet of the night. Good night. Sweet dreams."
you. you.